Hi there, I'm Eitan, and welcome back to the Wix Wiz. In today's video, I'm really excited to share with you a huge breakthrough in a topic that I have been struggling with from my very first day with Velo, and it's something that can really open up a whole new world of possibilities with developing your Wix website, and that is communication between Velo and the DOM. So if you want to learn all about that and more, let's get started. So let's first try and understand what the problem is that we're trying to solve. So on the one hand, we have our code editor inside of our Wix editor, and this is where we can go ahead and write some Velo code. And the good part about this is that it interacts with all of our Velo APIs, with all of the Wix business information, and with the elements that we have inside of our Wix editor. The issue is that this Velo code doesn't have access to the DOM. So we can't, for example, listen to certain events such as scroll events, and pretty much any kind of unique access to the DOM we don't have. On the other hand, within our dashboard, we have this custom code area. Okay, so that's over here within settings, and then you can just scroll down over here to the bottom to custom code. And this area allows us to inject custom code directly into the HTML of our Wix website. And this code can interact with the DOM, but it can't communicate with the Velo code, so it doesn't have access to all of the elements on our Wix website and to all of the Wix business solutions and Velo APIs. So we have two very powerful tools, but they're not talking to each other and they don't give us access to each other, which can sometimes hinder us from creating a complete solution for our Wix website. So let me give you a practical example for why this is an issue that we're going to solve together at the very end of this tutorial. And if you take a look here, what I've done is something very basic. So I've imported Wix members front end, and here I'm just calling the authentication.logout. And essentially what I want to do is to log out a member after they have been inactive for, let's say, 60 seconds. So if somebody doesn't move their mouse, that's what I'm going to count as inactivity. If they don't move their mouse for 60 seconds, I want to log them out of the website. So on the Velo side, I have access to this API, which allows me to log out the Wix member, but I have no way of detecting when a mouse has been moved within Velo because we don't have access to the DOM, and that's not an event that Wix exposes to us. On the other hand, I can go ahead and write a script here. So let's go here to my VS Code. So over here, I've written a simple script that we could paste inside of our custom code section of the Wix website. And this script essentially just declares a timeout of 60, and then it has an interval which at every second will decrement that timeout by 1, and if it equals to 0, it will run some logic here for logging out the member. At least that's what we want to do. And in addition, I've added an event listener to the document that can detect if the mouse is being moved, and whenever the mouse is moved, we bring that timeout back to back to 60. And essentially what that means is that as long as the user will continue to move their mouse, they will never be logged out. But the issue is here that since this code is going to be in the custom code section of our Wix website, then we don't have access to our Velo APIs. So we can never give the instruction to the API essentially to log out the member. So this is an issue where we don't have communication between our custom code and our Velo code to give that indication. And we can sometimes also encounter situations with an opposite issue that we have some kind of custom code snippet that we've gotten possibly from a third party inside of our custom code, and we need to communicate some data to it from our Velo code, but we also don't have that directional communication. So essentially, this is the issue that we're trying to solve, and I'm going to show you how to solve this at the end once we figure out how to establish that communication between the Velo code and the custom code in the dashboard. So now that we've established a need, I want to talk about the three ideas that I had for solving this and why I discarded the first two and ended up going with the third. So the first idea, as you can see here, was to establish some kind of server communication. So since these two parts of our website can't communicate with each other, we can set up either a third-party service or even possibly utilize Wix HTTP functions in order to have each of them communicate with that third party and then transmit messages to each other. The reason I discarded this pretty early without even trying to implement it is for two basic reasons. One is that it would be rather slow. So having each one of these communicate with the server and then the server communicating with the other end, it would create some delays in some of the passage of data between the sides, and it's definitely not an experience that we want to create with this solution. So that's one reason. The other one is that we would need to establish some kind of polling in order to know that one of the sides has received a message. So we can't initiate communication from the server to one of either the DOM or our Velo code. So what we need to do is to continuously poll and ask the server, have we received any message? Have we received any message? Have we received any message? And that would also be rather strenuous on both sides and rather complicated to set up. And it's just not a beautiful solution, so I decided to discard that one. The second idea that I had is to utilize the URL. Because the URL is something that is shared both by the custom code or the HTML and our Velo code, and we do have some access to them either through Velo APIs or through the regular JavaScript APIs, I thought that this could be a good communicator between both sides. And even though there are some initial issues with this approach as well. For example, we'd be quite limited into the amounts of data that we'd be able to pass through the URL because URLs do have a certain limit in length. But overall, I thought that this was a cleaner approach, and I did want to try and experiment and see if this was even possible. So let me hop in with you and show you what the code is that I implemented and what the results were for this second idea. Okay, so first of all, I've gone ahead and I've pasted my code inside of the custom code area. So I've pasted the code snippet over here. And as you can see, it's really uncomfortable to edit and view the code inside of this area. It's really just meant for pasting in the code. So whenever I'm talking about the code that we are injecting into this custom code part, I will show you in VS Code just so you can kind of see what's going on. But this is basically how the code is set up, and you can give it a name, and I'm loading it on all pages. So I'm just going to go ahead and apply, and I don't even need to republish my site for this custom code to take effect. On the Velo side, what I've done is I've set up some code over here, and what this code does is that when I click the send button, it's going to add a query param to the URL called inject, and the value that it's going to add at the moment is going to be called test. And the principle here is that I'm using an event listener called popState in order to detect changes to the URL. And then once inside the custom code I detect a change to the URL, I'm going to get the value of the query param inject, and that's essentially the data that I'm passing through from the Velo side to the custom code side. So let me go ahead and publish this. And then we could go ahead to the live site. And one thing that you'll notice here is that my live site is not a test Wix website. It's not a free Wix website, but I actually had to upgrade to premium and add a custom domain because custom code will only work with your own custom domain. It won't work with one of the Wix free sites. So that's one thing to note as you're following along and maybe trying out some of the things that I'm demonstrating here. So let me go ahead and head over to my site. And let's go ahead and try testing out this send button. So I'm going to go ahead here and click send. And you can see that we have added the query param to the URL, and we have added the value of test, but nothing really happened here inside of the website. And essentially what was supposed to happen here, if I hop over to the VS Code, is that once we have detected the change of the URL through the pop state over here, then we would get the value of the inject query param, and essentially we would alert from Velo plus value. Okay, so that's what was supposed to happen. So essentially what happened is that we did not trigger this pop state event inside of JavaScript. And I did some research afterwards to try and understand why this happened. And I'm quite sure that it has to do with the fact that Wix is a single page application, and the way that it handles the changes in URLs and the site history or the site navigation history doesn't trigger this event listener, which depends on when essentially changes in the site navigation history, to put it in a nutshell. So that wasn't working. So essentially what I had to do was to find another solution for listening to some kind of change in the URL. And I found that solution over here in something called hash change. Okay, so while pop state depends on some kind of change to the state of the URL, hash change is a change to the hash of the URL. So essentially, if we have a hash inside of the URL, if you're not familiar with a hash, it's this right over here. So if we have a hash inside the URL and that hash changes, then we can detect that change and essentially follow the same principles of extracting the data that came after the hash. So let's see how that works if we use the hash change event listener instead of the pop state event listener. So what I've done is I've gone into the custom code and I've changed the event listener here from pop state to hash change. And now inside of the editor and the Velo code, when I go ahead and inject test, in addition to that, I'm going to add a hashtag, and I'm just going to say here change. So hopefully that will add a new hash to our new hashtag to the URL and trigger that event listener. So let me go ahead and publish that. And I'm going to refresh the site. And let's try clicking the send button. So I went ahead and clicked the send button. We didn't trigger the effect that we wanted. And if we take a look here at the URL, we can understand why. And that's because Wix automatically encodes the character hashtag into this. Okay, so percentage 23 when it is adding it to the URL. And that's part of a standard of URL encoding, and that's primarily to avoid situations where we accidentally insert a character that we didn't want to insert that would either break the URL or induce some kind of functionality that we didn't actually want. Because we're actually trying to create some kind of effect here, but a lot of people might just try to add a hashtag in order to add a hashtag, not realizing that that could potentially cause some kind of effect. And that's why Wix has this encoding here. But unfortunately, it also breaks our hopes of using the hash change event listener in order to detect change in the URL. So this pretty much is a dead end from the perspective of Velo communicating to our custom code. There was one more thing that I went ahead and checked, that even if this didn't work, let's say, maybe we could possibly still communicate between our custom code and our Velo code. So by sending some kind of message, so changing the URL from the side of the custom code and detecting that change from Velo. And I tried to do that using the onChange event for the URL, or for Wix location essentially. And this is supposed to trigger when there's a change to the URL that doesn't trigger navigation, but unfortunately, this wasn't triggered by a change to query params or hash. So this would only be triggered by a change to the slug. So essentially, we reached a dead end there as well. So while URL communication was good conceptually, because it's shared between both the custom code and the Velo code, there are restrictions on primarily the Wix side, which are preventing us from establishing the communication through the URL, which essentially led me to my third and final idea. So my third idea, as you can see here, was to use iframes for communication. And here I also went through two stages. So my initial thought was that because I have control over the code inside of the iframe, essentially what I could do is I could create an iframe with a div inside, for example, and give that div a specific ID. So for example, here, give it the ID of port key. And then using the script in the custom code side, I could get an element within the DOM that is named port key, and communicate with that element using the element data attribute. Every HTML element has a data attribute which you can use to append your own custom data to the element. And essentially, I could use that as a method of communication between Velo and the and custom code, because Velo can communicate with iframes and iframe elements, and so can the custom code. The issue was that there are some restrictions on accessing the element inside the iframe, and also it's not so efficient to communicate the data in that manner because it uh, involves appending the data to the element, and it's just not so clean and beautiful. So that led me to my other idea, which was to use post message. And this is the final stage that I reached. And essentially, that the way that this works is that both the custom code and Wix can post messages to an iframe, and an iframe can also send messages to each of them. So using these methods of post message and on message within the iframe and within each of the sides that we're trying to get to communicate with each other, we can essentially pass messages between Velo and custom code and between custom code and Velo. Okay, so now I'd like to go over the code that we're going to be putting in the custom code part and in the iframe for this solution. So first of all, within the custom code, the first thing that I do is that I declare this variable portal, and that's just going to be used for storing the information about our iframe. And then I have a timeout set here, and I'll explain about that timeout in a moment. But essentially what we're doing is we are querying for all of the iframes within our HTML, and then we are selecting the first iframe. And this is something that we're going to have to think about later on, because we're going to want to handle situations where we have multiple iframes uh, on one page. But for now, I'm just going to assume that our portal is the only iframe on the page. And in addition to that, I add an event listener that will listen out for messages from that portal or from the window of that portal. And if that message contains data with the property of Velo, then I'm going to log that here inside of the console. Okay, so that's in terms of receiving messages from the iframe. And then over here, I've set up the option to send messages to the iframe, and we're going to do that as soon as this loads. So that's here inside of portal.contentwindow.postMessage. And the message that we're going to send is an object with a property DOM and the message of hello Velo, I'm the DOM. Okay, so that's in terms of the custom code. And the reason I've wrapped this all inside of a timeout is because I've noticed that it takes some time for the iframes to load inside of the DOM, and if I run this code, even if it's at the end of the body, if I run it immediately on load, then it doesn't find the iframes. So I've given it a short delay to make sure that the iframes have loaded before I actually try to select them. And what I found is that 3 seconds works. Maybe a bit less might work, maybe a bit more might be necessary, but generally that's the reasoning behind the timeout. In terms of the iframe itself, so what we're going to do is we're going to set up an event listener for messages. And whenever we receive a message, we're going to want to route it to the correct direction. So if we've received the message from the DOM, okay, so if the message came in from the DOM, then we're going to post the message, and we're going to have DOM event.data.dom. So we're just receiving a message and we're posting a message again. And it's important to note that each message that's posted from the iframe is going to be received both in the DOM and on the Wix side. So we're going to need to differentiate on each side where that message came from. And that's why over here, I'm only logging the message if the event has the Velo property. If we get a message in the DOM or in the custom code that doesn't have the Velo property, I'm not going to log it because that's actually just an echo of a message that we received that was sent from the DOM side. So that's what we do here. So we just take the data, and depending on where the data came from, we post a relevant message. So if the data came from the DOM, then we post a message with the property DOM. And if the data came from Velo, then we post a message with the property of Velo. So that's what our iframe is going to do. And I'm going to go ahead and put both of these code snippets in their correct places, and then I'm going to show you what the Velo side should look like. Okay, so here I am back in the Wix dashboard in the custom code area, and you'll see here that inside of this new custom code snippet called portal, I've pasted in the code that I showed you from VS Code. So that's all set up over here. And if I head over to the editor, I went ahead and I added in this HTML element, and I named it portal. And I've added in the code snippet that I showed you again from VS Code. So those two things are set up. In addition to that, I set up some Velo code here, and you can see that essentially what we're doing is we set up the send button so that when it's clicked, we post a message to the portal, and this is using the Wix APIs for HTML elements. So you can go ahead and check out the documentation on that as well. You'll just need to look here for HTML component, and all this information is written here in the documentation. So what I've done is I've set it up to post a message with Velo, hi, this is Velo, when we click the send button. And I've also set up the event listener to listen in for when we get any messages from the iframe. And if they contain event.data.dom, then we will log them because that's an important message from the custom code. So let me go ahead and publish this, and then we can head to the live site to test it out. Okay, so here I am on the live site, and I cleared the console, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to refresh this page again, just so you can see what happens as soon as I load the page. So here you can see inside the console, I got two messages. So one message is message received from DOM in iframe. Hello, Velo, I'm the DOM. Okay, so that's the first stage. And the second one is the message received from DOM in Velo. Hello, Velo, I'm the DOM. So essentially, this is the log from our Velo code, and the message is being sent from the DOM side. So that's super exciting, and that direction of communication is working. Let's go ahead and test and see what will happen when I click this send button. So I'm going to go ahead and click it. And here you can see that we got two new console logs, and one of them is message received from Velo in iframe, and it's hi, this is Velo, and message received from Velo in the DOM, hi, this is Velo. So essentially what we've done is we've established two-directional communication between custom code and Velo, and we also can send complex data structures. So we can send in objects, we can send in arrays, we can send in strings and numbers. So we really have a lot of power here with communication. And now I want to head in and demonstrate what we can do with it. So if you recall, in the beginning of the video, I presented a use case for this kind of communication, and that was to detect the user inactivity and essentially log the user out after X amount of time of inactivity. So let's go ahead and try and implement that with this new communication that we've established. So I've gone ahead and I've copied over the code that I presented in the beginning for that logout logic on the custom code side, and I've pasted it here within the general logic that we've set up in order to establish the communication. And essentially the last thing that we need to do is to log out the member. And the way we're going to do that is by sending a message to our Velo code to tell it log out the member. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send a message to the first iframe. So I'm going to call this function right over here. So send message to first iframe. And I'm going to send in an object that says DOM. And I'm just going to send a string which is logout. And the logic that I'm going to establish on the Velo side is that whenever I get the message logout, I need to log the user out. And there's a huge amount of flexibility here in terms of how you want to establish the communication and send over different instructions between each side. And it's really up to you how you establish this kind of logic. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the logout timeout to 10 seconds instead of 60 seconds, just so that we don't have to wait 60 seconds every time we want to test and see if it's working. So let me go and copy over this new script that I have over here. And I'm going to go and paste that inside of the custom code section. So I've pasted the new code here inside of the custom code section, and I've applied it. And now I'm just going to go and write the logic on the Wix side. So I'm going to go here, or the Velo side. So I'm going to go here inside of the editor, and let's pop open our Velo IDE. And what we're going to be changing is right over here, when we get the on message, I'm going to want to set up some logic if the message is equal to logout. So I'm going to add a condition here that if event dot data dot dom equals to logout, then here we're going to write some logic to log the user out, and we're going to do that just like we did before. So I'm going to import Wix members frontend right over here, and I'm going to call here Wix members frontend dot authentication dot logout. Okay, so that should log the user out when we get the instruction from the DOM that we need to log out. And the last thing that I need to do here is I just need to install the Wix members area so that we can actually log in and out of the website. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and then head over with you to the live site so that we can test this out. Okay, so here I am on the live site, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the developer tools over here. And I'm also going to go ahead and just refresh the page so we're starting from fresh. And you can see right over here on the upper right corner that I am essentially logged into the website because I have the option here to log out. So I'm currently logged into the website and I'm moving my mouse around. So currently, obviously, there's no reason for the system to log me out. But now I'm going to let my mouse just stay put, and I'm going to tell you to please like the video and leave any comments below if you have any questions or you want to share anything about this tutorial. And in the meantime, you just saw that flash of us being logged out of the website. And you can see right over here that up here on the upper right that it says log in and not log out. And that is because I'm currently logged out of the website because I didn't move my mouse for 10 seconds. And that's a huge security threat. And we got a message from the DOM telling the Velo code to log me out of the website. So that's a demonstration of how to use this for a real life use case scenario that I think is quite practical for a lot of people, and it's virtually impossible without this kind of solution for communication between Velo and the DOM. So again, if you like this video, please don't forget to like, and if you want to see more content like this, and updates even to this solution as I explore it more. I think I really just scratched the surface, and I really wanted to share this with you as soon as possible, even though I think there's more that this can develop in terms of also handling multiple iframes, like we said, and sharing more complex data and also sharing different use cases with you. So I hope to do that over the upcoming weeks. So if you want to stay kind of up to date on that and know when new videos come out, then I'd recommend subscribing to the channel, and I will see you next time.